Welcome to the Protego Foundation Book Club. Today, we're going to be delving into Tales of Beedle the Bard. I'm Allie, and I'm going to be leading the discussion today. Welcome back to those of you who have joined us for past sessions, and hello to everyone new. I think everyone here has been with us before, and I was about to say, I'm Allie, and I'll be your host for this episode because that's my my Protego cast intro. But okay, so we read Beedle the Bard and Tales of Beedle the Bard. Was this anybody's first time reading the book? Wow. Look at Team Protego.
I know, right? Everybody else has read it. I've always had it on my shelf. I've just never read it.
Yeah, I get that. I read The Wizard and the Hopping Pot and then Babbity Rabbity. And then I've just, heard the Three Brothers story, but I don't think that I actually read the middle two before because they didn't sound familiar, but I don't know.
I listened to the audiobook, which was really nice because I'm a pretty slow reader, and I mean, it's a very small book, but I read it, I did one story a day, and it was nice. And I just kind of read along with the actors who were reading it. It was fun.
That's fun. What actors are they?
I
know Eddie Redmayne, right?
No, he
just did Fantastic
Beasts, yeah, which I would love to hear that as well. But so we had, let's see, Ivana Lynch did one, Bonnie Wright did one, Jason Isaacs did one, and then I can't pronounce her last name, but I think her first name is Norma. I think she plays Hermione in Cursed Child, or she was the original London Hermione.
Okay, cool.
And then Jude Law did all the Dumbledore parts. And then I think there was one other person. I feel bad I don't remember.
That's cool. Did Jason Isaacs do the Harry Hart one? Do you remember? Because I feel like he would be good for that because he's I
think he did, because spookier. At first I was is this Jude Law again? And then it took me a minute and I was oh, because
it's very gothic. And I feel I feel like that style would be good for him. But anywho, what did you all think about where this book kind of falls in with the other books that we've read, animal rights wise? Because everything we've read so far has been Harry Potter, except for Carry On, which was kind of, was kind of taken from that, inspired by that. But this one, it's still Harry Potter, but it's very different because it's not one of the books, and it's not one that a movie has been made out of, or something that we know quite as well.
I mean, I feel this was a lot more just focused on the humans in the story, and if animals were mentioned, it was kind of just a side thought. Unless, I mean, the Animagi situation's not fully an animal, but still kind of an animal.
Anime guy. I had anime guy, and I was I think I read a different book than you. That anime guy, the the guy who
hilarious.
Reads or who watches the anime. Anyway, sorry, Valerie.
Well, in the audiobook they pronounced it Animagi, so I'm am I saying this wrong? I don't know. What do you think?
I think the Animagus episode for Protego Cast comes out this week, and it's going to sound really bad if it turns out that that's how you say it. So
you all said anime guy.
Yeah, I think it depends. In different, I think I don't know if the British British English maybe says the ja or something in some context. They're just I don't know. Language is so fluid. It's so
the thing is that if you look in the incantation of the spell, that how they make the animagus, it says animagus, it's pronounced as a j instead of g, so I think it's animagi and it's animagus, I guess.
That might be a Latin thing. Not sure.
Well, I'm gonna research that. Now I feel I probably should have.
Latin plural of mage. which like therefore plural of magic person, so therefore and like just because a lot of the things compound words, so anima from animal, and then magi from like mage, magic. So I think based off of the sources, like root words, I think it would be mag, but based off of if you pronounce it like based off of English pronunciation rules, it would be g.
Yeah. Very interesting, because isn't like magi just the word magi? Isn't that something?
Mm-hmm. You're thinking of the Mummy. I love that movie.
Something at Universal, right? Says that. That's all I know. I think you're right. On that note, random, since like Jude Law was reading it, a lot of, I think they're all British. Also, Warwick Davis did one of them. They would say like learned instead of like learned. And I was like, oh.
It's like older sort of, I think like bringing in the sort of, I don't know, like, you know, like Harry or Hogwarts is like kind of behind the times. And I feel like just the sort of magical world is kind of seen as like, not as, you know, not in like the 21st century sort of, even though it is and all that. But so like Valerie mentioned, these books were very much, I mean, not that, you know, animals, non-human animals were like the center of, you know, the 7 books. But I feel like even more so animals weren't like, I mean, they're also a lot shorter. So you can't really like stick as many, I was looking up again, you can't really like put as many animals in like one story and not make it a story about animals, you know? And so with the purpose of writing these books about magical and non-magical people, humans, I think that the author put even less sort of using animals as that kind of like whimsical or like sort of naturalizing, or like, I don't know what the word, not like, I keep thinking the word pastoral, which is not what I mean, but something along those lines. You can only put so much. So I think that's why like animals weren't as present. Still, I went in and highlighted all of the instances where animals came up, and it really wasn't a lot of places, but I think that they stood out more because of it, maybe. There's even one point, I forget which one of the stories it is, but I have it highlighted so I can look at that later, that they describe a food scene, like they all, like some people sit down and eat, and it doesn't mention what food it is, in a way that like, I feel like Harry Potter, anytime it said, you know, they ate X, Y, or Z, it was like lamb roast and like this, and it's just like gross descriptions of like food, and not just like animal, you know, like meat, but also like vegetables and the desserts. It just was so like descriptive and like, just very, I felt like heavy with like food description. Anyway, but these books weren't, and it didn't mention, you know, that they were eating any kind of animal, which I just was kind of refreshing to see.
I think the word they used was sumptuous, the most sumptuous foods, which I feel like probably is trying to imply like, I don't know, gross, whatever words people use for like the best parts of the meat and stuff. But in a way, maybe it's a good thing that animals aren't mentioned as much, because usually when they are, it's usually
not good.
This is how we're using them, or like an insult. So
definitely. What were you gonna say, Catherine?
Oh yeah, I was just gonna kind of agree with Valerie that like it's kind of very like different from the Harry Potter books in that like it's whenever there's an animal mention, it's usually just in passing. I mean, there are a few that come up as sort of like characters a couple times, like the worm in the Fountain of Fair Fortune, and then like in Dumbledore's like, I guess, notes on that story, like he talks about an Ashwinder, and we can go more into that later. But I feel like those are like the only 2 instances where we actually kind of, aside from Babbity Rabbity, an animal being like a central character, even for just like a scene or a description. The rest of it is basically just like they're very background, which to me makes like sort of sense, because like, I mean, this book came as like part of a set with 3 books, and one of them already dealt a lot with the Fantastic Beasts, obviously. So like, it kind of makes sense that these wouldn't necessarily, but it's also kind of interesting because a lot of like human folk tales have animals as sort of like main characters, especially if there's like a lesson to be learned. Like the one that comes to my mind is like the tortoise and the hare. But to see that that's like so different for the wizarding world is kind of interesting, and that these are all like very human centric tales.
Yeah, it's almost like humans use animals in like children's books to sort of paint like a magical sort of otherworldly situation, but wizards writing or magical people writing stories for magical children have their own, they can talk about themselves when they're, you know, casting these parts. They don't have to use, you know, a character that's so far from who they are, or who like the parents are, to kind of have that sort of magical feeling to them, that kind of whimsical, you know, note, because they have magic themselves. So yeah, you mentioned already like the Ashwinder, which they don't appear in the 7 books, right? They're just or are they somewhere like an ingredient or something?
I actually don't remember.
Does Parth remember, or Parth, you have something, or Valerie was going to say something?
Sorry, go ahead, Parth. I think their eggs are mentioned or something.
Oh, okay.
Oh yeah, I think so at some point.
Yeah, so we see the Ashwinder, and then we see the worm that you mentioned, and there's a donkey at one point, and there's a horse, like a steed, and a rabbit. Spoiler alert. There's a dog who passed on. I'm like going through my notes and like seeing all the animals. Yeah, but one thing that boat truckles are mentioned in one of Dumbledore's.
Horklumps.
Oh, and Horklumps, yeah. Sorry.
Don't they keep mentioning a story about a goat, but then we never actually see the story about the goat.
Aberforth's favorite story is funny. Yeah, I forget which one Dumbledore mentioned that. I know I saved it like in my notes, but
it was the Tale of 3 Brothers, like in the notes for that story.
Oh, okay.
He was like, Aberforth would rather listen to Grumble the Grubby Goat.
Right. That's funny. Yeah, so mostly non-magical animals. Like they mentioned bowtruckles, well, they weren't even in the story though, actually. It was just Dumbledore who wrote that later. And Horklumps and Ashwinder also, right? Were the Horklumps, I forget how they were involved.
Yeah, they were just in the notes. I think the only animals that were like in the stories were the donkey and the worm, and then if you count
the horse
the
and
rabbit.
And
the
rabbit, yeah.
I felt bad for the horse. They were always like describing him as like stone or like bone thin, and I was like, oh
yeah, not great. So it's just interesting that in the actual book, not Dumbledore's notes, but the actual book, only non-magical creatures are mentioned. Pretty sure. Also silk, but that was like a fabric of sorts. So they didn't mention like the silkworm, just the fabric that they make. Yeah, so I thought that was interesting. Because compared to Harry Potter, that has some magical animals, some non-magical animals, but like a lot of magical creatures, right? So cat, rat, dog, owls, probably others that I'm not thinking of right now, but oh yeah, the doe and the buck. But other than them, it's like all the potions ingredients for the most part are either like botanical, like, plants and stuff, or they're magical creatures that we don't really know of as much, I think. Not all of them, because there's also like cockroaches and I don't know, but there's just a lot more variety, and how in this book it was just like mainly, other than like in the actual stories, no magical creatures. So in the we talked a little bit about just kind of going talking about answering these questions, the individual stories and some examples from there, but I thought we could just kind of go story by story now and comment on those things. So in the introduction, I think that was like JKR, right? Who wrote the introduction? That was from her point of view. Okay. So she mentioned some different fairy tales and gave examples of some, and said that like in Muggle stories, a lot of times, the princesses are sleeping or so. I only copied like the one part that I wanted to talk about, so I forget the other examples, but she said, or turned the prince into a hideous beast. So talking about like what is done and what kind of magical things are done in non-magical stories, like the stories that we grew up with outside of the world of Harry Potter. And just like the use of the term beast, it always sticks out to me when I'm reading anything Harry Potter related, just because of that distinction between beast versus being, like humanoid versus other, sort of like that sort of, that kind of dichotomy, I guess, between them. So I don't know if anyone has any comments about the use of the word beast there. And then I thought it was interesting, not animal related, but I kind of highlighted it for myself also, or for like just outside discussion if we want to chat about it. But I thought it was interesting. It's written, the heroes and heroines who triumph in his stories are not those with the most powerful magic, but rather those who demonstrate the most kindness, common sense, and ingenuity. And I just thought that was like a pretty thing to just think about. Yeah, power versus kindness, common sense, and ingenuity. I feel like that's kind of like, I see like the 4 houses in there, in like powerful, like common sense, kindness, ingenuity. That like just stuck out to me because there's like 4 things there. Yeah, Parth, do you have something?
Yeah, so in the introduction, I want to highlight one more line when it says about the Beedle that he believed that the worst excesses of the wizard kind sprang from the all too human traits of cruelty, apathy, or arrogant misapplication of their own talents. Yeah. So I think it perfectly sums up with our world as well, that all too human traits of cruelty, apathy, and arrogant misapplication. So that says that we believe in like human supremacy, we do speciesism and everything, and we're neglecting what's actually the real in front of us. Yeah. So yeah, that's definitely. That's a really good point. That was the next bullet in my thing to talk about for the introduction. So that's great that you found that also. It means I'm not just pulling random stuff and nobody agrees with what I'm saying. So, yeah, so the quote, like Parth said, believe that the worst excesses of wizard kind spring from the all too human traits, right? And so I think that's interesting because, there's a lot of different ways to be involved in animal rights. And there are some people in some organizations who think, and this is within animal rights, obviously outside of animal rights, you have human supremacy over other creatures and, the idea of dominion and all of that. And not just in religious aspects, but, outside of that too. And just, there's a non-denominational hierarchy, I think, between humans and all, other species below us. I'm using quotes if anyone's just listening to this and not watching the video. So,
yeah, they all two human traits. And what was my point going to be there? Within the vegan world, some people are more for pure animal liberation and focusing just on non-human animals and, just liberating, I guess, like, and not paying that much attention to the human aspect of animal rights, and how within the systems that animal agriculture and animal exploitations operate, humans are very heavily involved, between the farm workers and the production workers and people living in and outside of those areas, and the people, I don't know, like with health things because of animal products and all of that stuff. So humans are very much involved in the world of animal rights, and also because a lot of humans, specifically people of color and the global majority, have, there's like this big word oppression up here, and then down here starts carrying off, into different groups of people who are all experiencing oppression in one way or another. And it's not making a comparison between these groups and their suffering. It's just acknowledging that it's a systemic issue in a lot of ways. So that was very tangential for the introduction. Sorry. I haven't been in school in like 3 months and I miss it. And I feel like I'm just going off and like writing essays in my head right now about all of this stuff. So yeah, all two human traits specifically, right? Of cruelty, apathy. Oh, that was where I was going, because humans also take care of themselves and not always each other, right? They take care of like their own kind or their own people sometimes. And that's not that animals don't do that, but I think that's just something to make note of. But yeah, the cruelty, apathy, and arrogance. Yeah, anything else on Brittany? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, the other thing I kind of noticed that's similar along those lines is in Dumbledore's notes, he talks about, how a lot of wizards kind of, their prejudice makes them want to negate like these stories that are just simple children's stories that basically want you to be a good person, right. But our human prejudices like preclude us from really taking those lessons to heart, especially as adults, as we get older. Kind of reminds me of like all the parables and stuff we're taught as children, and then as we get older, as it relates to animals and like other humans who are disenfranchised, we are taught to like segment them all away. Like, I'm a good person, but I don't care about animals. I don't care about the animals who are used for my food, for whatever. I don't care about the humans whose labor is being used for all this other stuff. And it's just like narrowed and narrowed and narrowed. And we're not like taking to heart those lessons that we were taught as children. I thought that kind of was a good crossover, because it seemed like that is exactly what Dumbledore was talking about in his asides in the book as well.
Definitely. That's a really good point. I think that, in a lot of ways, Dumbledore's notes were more, the stories were good, in themselves, like for what they were. But I think Dumbledore's notes give us a lot more insight into even like the time period that these books were written, and like the culture and like the, Muggle sentiment and all of those things. So it was good to have Dumbledore's notes also. And like what Brittany said, definitely. A lot of like, they quoted like the Malfoys from, I don't know if that was Braxis was Lucius's dad or grandfather, or how far up that goes. I forget. If anybody, I feel like Parth would know. Parth knows everything, or Nicole. But anywho, but yeah, like Lucius, and then he says like he doesn't want like his son to grow up thinking it's okay to have like magical marriages and all of that like wild stuff. The Malfoys. So, okay. So that's a lot for the intro. Kind of good to get that like background. The first story in the storybook is The Wizard and the Hopping Pot. So we've been talking, everyone read it. So it's not like a spoiler if I'm like, oh, the pot starts to like move and develops all of these like animal-like things, right? Because I was going to skip like right ahead, because we've talked about animals, right, a lot, and like the creatures that are, you know, in these books. But what about like what are they called? Inanimate objects, right? Like a pot, but then they become sentient, right? Or like they don't become sentient, they become animate. Like, does that give them sentience? So, because we've talked about sentience in book clubs before, and we've talked about it on the podcast before. And I feel like a lot of, like, not as much as, you know, there are animals, or as many as there are, but there's a lot of like transfiguration, or like animating things in these stories. So the pot itself, it says it had sprouted a single foot of brass and was hopping on the spot in the middle of the floor, making a fearful noise upon the flagstones. So it was making a ton of noise, but yeah, hopping on a single foot. And then after all of those issues went by, right, so like the pot started braying and groaning and slopping and hopping and all of these things, crying like a baby, whining like a dog. It started developing all of these very alive sort of features, like being able to cry and being able to whine. And I don't know if they're experiencing the emotions or what. So I just kind of wanted somebody else, I'll stop talking, to jump in about the sentience aspect, or the possible sentience, but the animation of these inanimate objects. Nicole.
Part of it also comes down to sort of like how in Muggle fairy tales, like you do a lot of the time have animals being anthropomorphized into having more, you know, human-like either behaviors or capabilities. I kind of wonder if like inanimate objects being sort of having a similar thing for wizards kind of ends up having this similar effect, just on the basis of the fact that within wizarding creatures, there would still be a sense of that, hey, a lot of these things do have clear sentience. Like, you can have a conversation with a house elf elf who works in houses, or if you speak it, you could talk to a mermaid. And there are a lot of creatures that have to them clear sort of sentience that can kind of a lot of the time make it easier to assume, like, oh, well, hey, this is like a fairy tale thing, so it's this, you know, this thing is more like a, you know, is more like a creature, a being, rather than being a beast. And where that already is a fuzzy distinction. It's like, oh, hey, well, in fairy tale land, it's just a little bit closer to the other side. Versus to have the same story effect, you kind of need to have like, hey, this thing that you didn't think of as having any mind of its own now does. Because they already are in a situation where, hey, there are a lot of creatures who you're accepting, who, like, depending on how you feel at the time, you're either accounting as almost people, or you're counting them as basic, as like, you know, as like as nothing. And so they sort of, I think, to make it work better, you have to take something that everyone is going to have the starting point of, it's nothing, to bring it up to a level of like sentience, to have the same like storytelling purpose. Because, oh, hey, it's something that you wouldn't think of, but look, it does actually have thoughts and feelings, and it can be moral compass without having to get into, hey, should we be better to the like X group that we are possibly being bad to? Because nobody's going to think we need to be better to pots. The pot.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I was going to comment on something that you said, but I think you explained it well enough. And yeah, so yes. Catherine.
Yeah, I know we've had this conversation in a couple other book clubs before about sentience, and we kind of got to the end point of, well, if something's like animate or transfigured because of magic, then it doesn't have sentience. But I think like obviously that's not the point of this story to like argue either way for that, but it was like it almost, since it kind of made the pot a character, I think it did make the strongest argument for the possibility of sentience within an animated or transfigured object. It's kind of like almost like how we think of AI at the moment, where we're like, oh, it's just AI, it doesn't have feelings, yada yada. But like, what if it does? And to me, this story like made the strongest case for that. Because like, I mean, you could also say that, okay, maybe the hopping pot like had a spell on it to gather all these different things into it, and that's why it, you know, like did what it did. But like, I don't know, it kind of, since it was so much of a character in the story, it almost felt like it was a being of some sort. And maybe that's just because of the way stories are written and the way we perceive characters. But yeah.
No, that's a really good point too. I think it wasn't just like, you know, the teapot was transfigured to just kind of like pour tea when a mug was underneath it and just kind of like do sort of a passive motion that just, you know, it was like this cauldron started, you know, it sprouted hair, and it was, did it sprout hair? It had like warts and stuff. I don't remember. No. Anyway, but it was like whining and crying and, you know, hopping and groaning and braying and all of these. Yeah. So I think that because, and also like this pot followed that guy around like everywhere, right? Didn't it say like it just kind of like followed? I'm using it because I don't know, you know, their if their sentience is warrants that. But yeah. Brittany.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it when I was reading it, but thinking about it now, I think that is a pretty logical point to make, because also the pot doesn't go back to being completely inanimate at the end of the story once the wizard kind of figures out that he like what he has to do to not be like bugged by it, because he still has to put the shoe that his dad gave him on the pot, because like the foot doesn't go away. So I'm assuming the pot is still hopping, which means that like it has also been like completely changed by the story. It hasn't gone back to being fully inanimate by the end.
Yeah. Valerie?
Sorry, I still can't figure out how to raise my hand.
Okay.
I kind of had a different just impression, since it was saying that the father left the pot, right? And like the pot kind of activated when the son wasn't doing like helping the other people, and then whatever ailments the people had, the pot would kind of like have that effect. And it seemed almost like programmed in that way of like, okay, there's someone with warts and like now I have warts. But the other thing is just like, if the pot was sentient, why is the pot choosing to like help all these people? Like it seems like the only purpose of this pot is to help people, but like why? Like it seems like it was created to aid others rather than have its own identity, its own like wants. And like, I don't know, if this guy wasn't I don't know what they called him, just a wizard, he's like the only wizard, right? But he was like good at potions, so like a potion master. If this guy wasn't a potion master, what would the pot be doing if he didn't have that like purpose, I guess? And I just feel like the wizards gave the object a purpose rather than the object having its own purpose of like just existing, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, because I was gonna ask, like, before you, I think what you just said kind of cleared up my question as like a no. If you would compare the pot to like elves used in houses and like Davi, because a lot of the things you were saying sounded very, it lined up like, well, now I can't remember, but up until like the last thing you said, like otherwise they wouldn't have well, even that, because a lot of, when like Winky got fired, she was like, I have no purpose now. Like what, she was completely lost. So, like why did the pot choose to stay there? Why did the pot choose to like help these people? Probably because, not probably, if you take that side that he's, the pot equate to like elves used and exploited like for their services, then that would be why, because they were, born and bred into this job basically, and like don't know any other way. But yeah, interesting.
Yeah, it makes me think of the Monster Book of Monsters, who seems more sentient to me, but then I'm wondering, is that just because it has eyes and like a face and it's a little like more recognizable? But it seems like, the purpose of the Monster Book of Monsters is to be read, but the like sentient part is preventing you from reading it. Like it doesn't actually want you to read it. It tries to defend itself. So that seems more sentient to me, where they have their own like, not agenda, but like things that they want out of life, instead of just like, I'm gonna do whatever like the human wants me to do, because what else is there in life?
Definitely. Sorry, I was just trying to find an eye emoji to send Mel, because she mentioned like the glass of like Moody. Did you mean like the Moody's eye?
I mean the dark detector that shows your enemies.
Oh, yeah.
So it has kind of this kind of, I feel like it has the same sense in a way, that is just its purpose. It's enchanted that way. And I feel like the pot is a bit similar to that, just in a different function.
Interesting. Yeah.
Because didn't too, at the beginning of the story, it's like the father knows the son, it like is kind of selfish and doesn't want to help other people. So I think that the father like created this pot with this intention of teaching his son the lesson, which is the point of the story. But
that makes sense. Yeah, who's to say? Not us, but those are interesting. Just like that, it's interesting every time you read a book, and then that's what book club is for, to like hear other people's opinions, but just like viewpoints that you didn't quite see before, or things that like spark. Books are so cool. So other than the pot in the Wizard and the Hopping Pot, there was the lost donkey, who was then summoned from a distant briar patch and set down softly in the stable. So happy ending there. And then the last thing I had highlighted was just in Dumbledore's notes. Muggles were described as pigmen, used as an insult, but I thought, obviously using it as an insult because the person writing, which I think was the Malfoy, the Brax or somebody, maybe that was a different one. Yeah, wrote about pigmen. Yes, Parth.
Yeah, so about the donkey, do you really think it's a happy ending? Because they use the donkey for the material to send it, take to the market and back and forth, right? So we don't see any context here, like how the donkey is treated. We just saw like how the donkey got summoned and like gently put on the stable, but like we don't know how the person who has the donkey, who is treating the donkey well or not. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a very fair point. You got me there. In my mind, they're at like a farmed animal sanctuary and the donkey's returned and everyone loves them and they eat all the treats all day and everything's happy. So that was the head canon I was operating with. But yeah, you're right. if the donkey's being used, and they probably are, for, you know, being exploited for their strength and their body and their, you know, whatever else.
Yeah, because it says in like in the starting when he come for the donkey.
Yeah, I don't really remember the first part of that. I just remember my highlights. So, but yeah, there's probably a good example.
It says that without her, I cannot take my wares to market, and my family will go hungry tonight. So
yeah, that's tough, because then it's also bringing in the idea of like, you want to exploit an animal for humans, but humans have to eat, and that's a whole other book club. You know, if we ever go into like, okay, go ahead, Valerie.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, if you got a wheelbarrow and like wheeled your stuff, like a donkey can't carry that much, right?
Yeah.
So there are other ways.
Yeah, I'm not for that. I'm just saying in certain cultures, you know, that's what people are working with. And but yeah, there's also such thing as human labor for if you're doing it yourself because you want to, not because you're making other humans do things for you. But
and I mean, the donkey could have a great life like otherwise, and you know, he just has to walk back and forth once a day. I think that is, it just really depends, like you said, how the donkey's treated. But it does also say that the donkey had gotten lost or stolen, but then is found in a distant briar patch. So did the donkey actually like run away? You know, like maybe
they
the
were
donkey
escaping.
didn't want to come back.
Maybe this is actually a tragedy. The stories, donkey on the run.
Yeah, the other side of that is if the donkey is domesticated, they might not be able to
survive
take care of themselves, especially if they're a herd animal and they're on their own. They're more susceptible to like being preyed upon. So you don't know.
You know, who knows? But yeah, maybe everything I thought and imagined and dreamt for this story of being a happy ending it's just been falsified. So, okay. The Fountain of Fair Fortune is the next story that we read, where 3 people met and decided that they were going to team up so that they could get to the fountain together, and then I guess they would like figure it out later was the goal, but they would work together so that all 3 of them could pass through and get to this fountain. And then the knight was dragged along with them, was dragged off of his steed. So his steed, the horse wasn't with them, I don't think, because I don't think the horse showed up again after that. So hopefully they ran free and are chilling with the donkey because he escaped again and for good this time, and everyone is happy. So yeah, and especially because the horse was described, and Valerie mentioned this earlier, I think before we started recording, or maybe during, but that the horse was described as bone thin. So they need to get out of there and go eat some food. And then let's see what else happened. And then they got to the fountain and they were like, no, you do it. No, you. And then finally, and it's because all of their things started like fixing themselves, right? Like the heartbreak and the disease, like the sickness and the other thing. And then the night, but it turns out that the fountain wasn't magic, right? That was it, that it was just but it was like the power of will and all of that. So we had the horse and then we had the worm, were the 2 animals in that story until we got to Dumbledore's notes. But does anybody have any questions or any questions about the worm? Any comments or thoughts or anything about the worm? Yes, Catherine, sorry, go ahead.
I know we were talking earlier about how most of the animals in these stories were like normal, non-magical animals, but I feel like this one might actually be magical because I forgot until I looked at my notes again.
It's like a huge, they're like a massive talking worm.
Yeah. and that it's like big and white and stuff like that. So I'm pretty sure that that's the only like magical being in these stories. And I want to know more about it because like I don't think like Fantastic Beasts never touches upon any type of like animal like that.
Yeah, no. Has anyone read the Throne of Glass? No, not the Throne of Glass, the other Sarah J Maas books. A Court of Mist and Fury, A Court of Thorns and Roses. I forget which one's first, but in it there's, okay, Nicole's read them. So this worm reminded me, I forget which book it is, the second, or maybe it's the end of the first book, I think, when they're, sorry, I'm like looking at Nicole, like, right? Like, to, what's the word? Like, anyway, basically be on my side that I'm not making this up, my brain. And so there's this competition thing, and the main character is fighting this giant, bloated, blind, I think white worm. And I just found that really interesting that, the like those words are just to describe, and this worm is huge also, like it's a giant worm with like all these teeth and everything, but it just reminded me of that because worms are never really described, even in like in Prisoner of Azkaban, when we first meet the flobber worms, like they're not described, like none of these descriptions are like used to be like, these are cool animals. And then Valerie just said in the comment or in the chat, it reminds me of SpongeBob. And that's literally the only episode of SpongeBob I've seen is that one with the giant worm.
Are you serious?
Yeah, because I used to say, oh, it was the one with the giant worm and the squirrel. And people are like, the squirrel's in like, I don't know if all the episodes, but apparently a main character. So anyway, yes. Okay, so a giant worm. I remember that's the only episode I've seen. Okay, go ahead, Parth. Or unless Catherine, did I cut you off?
Well, I had one more tiny thing.
Okay,
well,
sorry.
Not tiny, I guess. But like, and actually you kind of touched upon it when you were talking about the Sarah J Maas version of the white worm, where you were talking about how someone was like fighting it. And it's like kind of the same as in here. I'm like, why is people's reaction to always like fight the worm?
It's a little weird. Yeah.
Like that's kind of rude. You just come up in its home and you're like, here, I'm gonna throw rocks at you.
I'm gonna fight you.
I'm trying to like slice you with my sword. Like, why? Like it didn't even say that the worm, like, I don't know, it just said words to them. It didn't attack them. And then they were just like, okay, we're just gonna like try and like physically beat you. And I'm like, yeah, why was that your first reaction? But also like when you were mentioning flobber worms, I had like a Tyler headcanon moment. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Where like
bath idea.
Like this worm is like an escaped flobber worm that just is living its best life, and it just got that big because it was allowed to grow that big and stuff like that because it was on its own and chilling and
like cows.
Yeah, or maybe because he was also old, hopefully because he was blind, and I don't know if flobber worms, if they have vision, I forget. Anyway, go ahead, Parth.
Yes, the problem I have is with the language. It says like, it literally describes it as the monstrous white worm. Like, I like the way the scene finishes with the worm. I don't visualize the worm as a monstrous. Like, it might be a gentler thing that I have read across the book, but like when you say like the monstrous, like I know they wanna make it like it's like a big humongous thing instead of like just like describing as a monster, but still, like if you are like telling this story to the children, the only thing that will come to their mind is gonna be like, it's like a monster looking worm. Right? So yeah, that's the only issue I have with this one.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, just like the language choice specifically. Go ahead, Valerie.
So this worm literally talks to them. And then did they even try to talk back to the
They were
worm?
just like, oh yeah.
Wouldn't you be like, what do you mean by that? Like, can we please pass? You know, like, why wouldn't that be their first reaction instead of, trying to subdue, entrance, or kill him? But I feel like that's just kind of how humans react to something they don't understand or something that frightens them, is like, I don't want this here. So how can I get rid of it? And, you know, even if it's like a spider, I don't want you here. So I'm going to, you know, smush you. That's just the first thing that comes to their mind, which I think is taught. But
I was just going to make a joke about like colonization, and like, not really a joke, but yeah, anyway, I was like, that sounds very like American and British, but so I can say that because I'm both. Okay, but anyway, let's see. And then the like we talked about the Ashwinder, is that, that's the one in this story. So when Dumbledore was talking about like the play that Hogwarts put on, which I have a hard time like getting behind the idea that they had like a chorus class and like music and stuff, because they had like a whole like musical theater club or something, or like drama club. But Catherine, go ahead.
I have to talk about this because it was kind of like my favorite part of the entire book. Like, because first of all, like, Professor Kettleburn, what are you doing? Like, you should know better. You
Where did Hagrid
like,
learn it all?
Creatures person, like, why are you taking this animal that is definitely like not supposed to be around wizards much and like putting it in this situation? Like, it just, and I think, Professor Kettleburn survived no fewer than 62 periods of probation during his employment as Care of Magical Creatures teacher. Like, I feel like he's worse than Hagrid. Like, why did they let him keep teaching? But I also love this part because, like, I know how you like just mentioned like, what the heck, there was a chorus class, like there was it was just kind of funny to me that like one of the professors, I think Professor Beery, left Hogwarts to teach at WADA, which is a play on like BADA, Wizarding Academy of Dramatic Arts, British Academy of Dramatic Arts. Like, I don't know, I found it really funny. But like, the idea that they would place an encouragement charm on a giant, like, or on a snake to have it perform in this play, like, that idea anyways, because it's a dangerous animal, but also like for anyone who's ever like been in like theater or film or whatever, and like, you know, has seen animals being used in those situations, which we obviously don't condone, like, it's hard to tell them what to do. Like, even if you have like the trained animals, they're going to do what they want to do. And so like, if you do that with a more docile animal, like, you have less likelihood of mishaps happening. But like an Ashwinder, like, really? So I found this really entertaining. I'm like, well, they kind of reaped what they sowed when it like caused a ruckus in the
and an actual fire. So and the fact that what was that, Catherine? Sorry.
I was just like, you show them Ashwinder. Like.
And then Nicole said in the chat, the fact that the Ashwinder laid eggs, because you can tell when a snake has eggs inside. So that was the
I just hope they weren't punished for the situation that ensued.
The book didn't say, but like, I hope not either, because that's not their fault. Oh my god, that reminds me of like SeaWorld and like Telecom, I think, when he basically got punished for sadly mauling one of the trainers, but like, it wasn't his fault. Like,
at least they didn't,
they separated him off from everybody else.
At least they didn't kill him, because I feel like
no, but they
like a tiger, you know, when like animals get out at a zoo and they just shoot them because they're like, oh, they might hurt someone.
Yeah, actually I think that happened recently somewhere. Like someone jumped into a lion or a tiger enclosure and the cat ended up like hurting or killing the person, and then they had to like put it down. Like they had to put it down. I'm like, no, you didn't.
No.
It wasn't the animal's fault.
Exactly. Which is why I think it's interesting that Tilikum like got to, I don't know what the details were with that, but
they like ordered him off from like the rest of the population, I think. Yeah.
I think they kept using him in the shows. It just wasn't like human contact with him.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Anyways, don't support SeaWorld.
Yeah. No. I think that was pretty much it. Because I want to make sure that we can get to the other stories too. Parth, if you want to chime in, and then we'll switch to Warlock's Hairy Heart after you.
Sorry. Just
no, you're
one
totally
more
fine.
thing about the Ashwender. So I went back to the Fantastic Beasts book to look about that, but the thing is they only live for an hour. So, and they die right after they give eggs, right? So it was really strange to use, first of all, to use an Ashwender for the play. Like, what happened, something like got delayed and something, and the Ashwender lays eggs before it even comes on the stage or something like that. Like, you don't know, like, can you find a new Ashwender as soon as possible? Or like, because the only thing it says that it lives for about an hour, that's all. So it was really strange that they get to use an Ashwender. So I don't know.
Yeah, interesting. I didn't look up Ashwinders when I reread this book, or this is one of those stories that I read, wasn't it? Yeah. I mean, I read all of them for this one for book club, obviously, but in the past. So, but I from Fantastic Beasts, I don't really remember them much either. If they were, they were the one in like the teapot thing, right? Oh wait, no, that was somebody else. I don't know. I made this. Yeah, I was thinking an Akami. I'm thinking of a snake. So I should have looked up this.
The Ashwender eggs. So if you want to see, the Newt actually gives Ashwender eggs to that goblin.
Okay. Yeah. So they are long like that. Makes sense. So, cool. Yeah. And then in the last note that I have for that was just see Fantastic Beasts and where to find them for a definitive description. And Parth did. It ought never to be voluntarily introduced into a wood-paneled room, nor have an engorgement charm placed upon it, right? So Dumbledore knows what's up and says, well, he doesn't, Dumbledore. But in this case, he said they shouldn't have an engorgement charm or, So the next story was, is the Warlock's Hairy Heart. Now, I only have 2 notes from the actual story of this. And if other people have other things, that's great. I have a lot more from like Dumbledore's part, but the only 2 notes that I made for the actual story were the silk stringed lutes. So silk on like part of an instrument. I think that's what that means. Catherine's nodding and she's my go-to music person. So, and then that the table was laden with silver and gold, bearing the finest wines and most sumptuous foods, right? Sumptuous. And so we touched on that a little bit, just how it was kind of nice not having like detailed descriptions of all icky foods and stuff. But and then Valerie made the point that the word sumptuous just kind of like feels like it sort of implies, like big, like fatty, meaty dishes or something, but at least we don't have to read about them. And then I thought it was interesting that the term hairy heart was used. This is going into like Dumbledore's notes, used sort of as like an insult, or saying that somebody didn't have like the emotion to like for instance, the book, the Harry Hart, like the self-help book that he says was written, A Guide to Wizards Who Won't Commit, right? Which I thought was kind of funny. And then it was rumored, or let's see, I'm looking at my notes here, but just using the term Harry Hart and kind of like, in my mind, I picture like Beauty and the Beast or something, like a heart that's like, not that you ever see the beast's heart, but just sort of like a beast of a heart, right? With like fur and just like something like that. So I think that using that kind of animalistic word, I think like that's that language choice to make that mean like not like basically, yeah, as an insult. Did anyone have anything about that, or another anything about the Horcrux were next on my list? Yes, Catherine.
I actually wanted to read a quote from, I don't know if it was from the story or the notes, because I can't remember. But it said, "The heart he has locked away slowly shrivels and grows hair, symbolizing his own descent to beasthood. He is finally reduced to a violent animal who takes what he wants by force, and he dies in a futile attempt to regain what is now forever beyond his reach, a human heart." And that is where I hated this story. Because it was just like hitting you over the head with, beast is bad, like animals are dangerous, and like the big hairy ones are scary and like not human. And yeah, I did not like that analogy whatsoever.
Yeah, I totally forgot about that. I have it written in my notes too, but it was after something about Horcrux, so it got lost in there. But yeah, using the words, it says inhuman, like slowly shrivel, grow hair, like beasthood, a violent animal, right? Who takes what he wants by force. And it's just like,
but that's so human. Like,
yeah,
it's hilarious because like she's or the author's like trying to make this comparison in this story anyways, or I guess Beedle is trying to make this comparison between like an animal, like animals' instincts and like the, you know, the beastliness of like having fur and all that stuff. But like what he's describing is actually very human. It's not beastly at all. It's in fact, I would say that those traits are like more human than they are beast-like, because beasts don't really take what they want by force in the manner that humans do. So to me, it was kind of like a failed analogy.
Yeah, definitely. And I just had a thought just with you explaining that. It also kind of made me think of like werewolves and the way that like transformations are often like described throughout, not just in Harry Potter, but I mean, you know, if you have something like Twilight, the werewolves are more like conscious of what they're doing. But then like Lupin, you know, when he transformed, it was very different. And he didn't have, you know, unless he was with his friends who were animals, like non-human animals at the time, he had a lot less control over what was happening. And I think that just kind of for any like werewolves reading this, or, you know, werewolf loved ones reading this, it could be kind of difficult. And then, you know, I could get into, you know, the comparisons that have been made between like some human diseases and like werewolf transformation and stuff, and just kind of that isolation and that othering of people. That's kind of how it was described, I feel like, because like, and also like the movie Werewolf, I feel like was different from the book Werewolf in a lot of ways, and very different from other werewolves and how they're portrayed, like as just giant wolves, or as like, because like Lupin was like kind of more like this, like shrivelly, sort of like very wolf-like, but also like alien in a lot of ways, with the hair and like, yeah, and a violent animal who takes what he wants by force. And I don't know, that was a connection I hadn't made yet.
Yeah, like there really aren't any non-human animals who just take what they want by force, like just for the fun of it. Like,
yeah,
if they need to eat meat, they'll hunt, but it's not like they just kill for the fun of it and there is no purpose. And just it makes me think of Jurassic Park, how once again humans like created this like hybrid dinosaur who just wanted to kill everything, and it was like for entertainment. We should talk about Jurassic Park sometime.
Yeah,
like it's not a natural trait, it's really just created to scare people, and like werewolves aren't real, it was created by humans to be like, oh, this scary beast who just wants to murder you. Like some humans just get like some kick out of being afraid, and it's always, well, no, it's not always animals. But yeah, like in real life, humans are the only species that do crazy things like that. So,
yeah.
But yeah,
Definitely.
I agree with what Catherine said 1000%. Like I was thinking the same thing. It's very frustrating.
Oh yeah, and then the last thing though that I highlighted, it didn't copy all of it, so but it says not to be confused with hairy snout human heart, a heart-rending account of one man's struggle with, and it doesn't say, but that was like werewolf
lycanthropy.
Okay, I was like gonna say werewolfhood because I don't know what the next word was, but anywho, I just saw the chat. Oh wait, yeah. Parth mentioned that movie Lupin reminds him of a Wendigo, which I don't know much about other than what I've seen in Supernatural. So, yeah. Does anyone want to touch on the? So they mentioned actually. Oh no, that's different. Sorry, I thought I had a picture of horklumps on my wall, but they're a kind of toadstool. Horklumps are pink, bristly, mushroom-like creatures. It is very difficult to see why anyone would want to fondle them. And so they talk about, this was like the weirdest part, especially in like notes of a kid's book. I was like, this wasn't necessary, my man, but yeah. So anyone want to touch on just horklumps in general? Maybe not the rest of it, or you can go for it. We're all adults here.
I was kind of wondering, because the one thing is that in some of the other things is horklump juice is sort of described as like a potion ingredient, and I'm kind of wondering if like just based off the fact horklumps are then animals,
are they milked?
If like horklump juice would be like horklump milk, and then it's sort of the fondling would be sort of, more like a milky cow type thing, but on mushroom guys.
She literally called off the engagement, so it must have been like a really big deal.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Which I was just sort of like, on one hand, that makes the fondling make more sense if he's trying to come up with a way to get product, use these creatures that, for personal gain, can kind of work in that sort of aspect, where it becomes he is sort of, either way, fondling is presumably exploiting them in some way, either for pleasure or possibly to make juice, or possibly in a like more typical cow way where you like exploit their milk making capability. So it's sort of more, my thought was kind of more like, it might be like cow.
Yeah, I'm partly glad you brought that up because I wouldn't have thought of it, but I would have been fine never thinking that.
I'm very sorry.
No, but it's good. Like it's a good
tiny
point. Yeah.
Well, I definitely think we have given it more thought than the author even did. I think the author was like, what's something ridiculous that I can come up with?
Yeah, definitely.
But actually, like when you brought that up, Nicole, that just actually reminded me of like an animal it's not like necessarily like milked like you would think a cow is milked. So beavers, they have these anal scent glands that are expressed to like get the juice from, I guess, the pus or whatever it is, for like different flavors and scents.
Yeah, it's called
when I first found that, Yeah. When I first found that out, when I was becoming vegetarian and stuff, like my brain just automatically started like describing it as like beaver butt juice. And so like that kind of, when you said Horklump juice, I was just like, oh my God. But like I knew I'd heard Horklump somewhere, but I didn't realize that it was like they were talking about a potion ingredient that like gives it so much more like disgusting depth. Like but yeah, either way, like for whatever reason he was supposedly fondling the Horklumps. Either way, it's bad.
I think deer is the other. There's like a type of deer that
musk deer
exploited for musk. Yeah. And like, and you put that in a perfume that you then spray on yourself is just the weirdest thing I've ever heard in my life.
Well, this was fun. Parth, I'm gonna call on you. And I hate to also cut you off again, but once you're done, we'll probably just switch to Babbity Rabbity so that we can get through the next two, but no rush on your comment.
Okay, so now more on the Horklump. So this description of them is like they look like mushrooms, but they have roots like a tentacles. So and they eat worms from underground. So that's how they grow. So and it also considered as pests, which we don't use the word term, but still. So like it's really interesting now. Like when you think about the Horklump juice, so we don't know which which side we are using to get the juice. So that's all.
Yeah, sorry, I was commenting or I was responding to Nicole. So, but yeah, no, that's true. Interesting. Mel put up a picture of them. So for anyone listening and not watching, there's a picture. So that's also a little disturbing, but I'm really glad we're talking about these critters. I'm seeing them in a whole new light. And I'm going to move on to Babbity Rabbity. So Babbity Rabbity and her cackling stump. I must say, before I read this for the first time, which was, I don't know how long ago, but I read it, but I forgot what it was about. And the fact that she turned into a rabbit really surprised me, which is probably says a lot about how tired I've been this week. Because it literally says rabbity in the, so spoiler alert, like I said before, she's a rabbit. And the first animals in the story are the ferocious black hounds, a pack of ferocious black hounds, issued to a brigade of witch hunters. And the king threatened, right, the sorcerer, and said, my brigade of witch hunters will hunt you down with their hounds, right? So using these animals, these dogs, as weapons basically against people. And then we see, I forgot about the horse in this story. The horse flying. So next I shall make that horse fly, cried the king, pointing his twig at his own steed. And then Babbity from inside the bush pointed her wand at the horse and it rose high, right? So making a horse levitate using Wingardium Leviosa, I'm presuming on a horse. Not a great look. That's not, Valerie.
I just want to add that in my book, there is an illustration of when the horse is raised up, because I feel like the way it's written, you just imagine like the horse just like raises up and then goes back down, but the horse is upside down in the illustration. So I just feel like that makes it a lot worse. Yes, that's the one.
Oh, that's horrible.
Yeah, that would be like,
it's not a happy horse. Yeah, I just pictured like whoop whoop whoop, maybe he was like uh-oh, but then like put down just fine, but it looks like a lot more happened, which is not fine. So thank you for pointing that out. This was I keep looking up because I have these, I think I've shown them in other book clubs, but these herbology like prints that I have with different like Harry Potter. There's like mandrake and dirigible plum and venomous tentacula, but there's also the leaping toadstool, and I always forget because there's a toadstool that's eaten and somebody died of a toadstool, and I don't know that that's that toadstool necessarily, but I always forget, well, I don't forget, but I don't mention that these toadstools, it says sentient being underneath on like the description of them, which I find interesting because they're like mushrooms. They're not related to the toad. They're a kind of fungus, I think. And they are, yeah. I always look at Catherine, and if she's nodding, then I'm not making a fool of myself and spouting lies. But yeah, so they're sentient beings. So
are those images that you're talking about like official, or were those like fandom art?
They were done by, I'll find the artist. They're on Etsy.
Because like I'm just thinking like I don't know if toadstools in the realm of Harry Potter are supposed to be sentient, or if the artist just kind of decided to do that as a fun little.
Oh, I think I looked them up once. But yeah, and it says produced in collaboration with Phyllis Bohr and Professor Neville Longbottom. I thought it was cool. But yeah, those are them. There's so many spider webs up there. Cool. I think the toadstools were leaping toadstools. Oh, it says so. Oh, I see now. That they're sentient. Okay, cool. Yeah, a leaping toadstool was a magical sentient mushroom which had the ability to jump. So interesting. So there's them, and then a dog. Oh yeah, the dog. Yeah, and then Babbity wasn't able to, raise the dog from having died. And that's what kind of like, changed the game there. And then Babbity ran, and then they were like, she's a tree. And then she said things to them. I didn't copy any of her quotes, but, and then they were like, she'll be a tree forever. Or no, they cut her down. And then she was like, I'll be here, make a statue of me. But then afterwards, a little rabbit hopped out holding a whiskery old rabbit with a wand clamped between her teeth. So yeah. And then it talked about, this one I thought was interesting. I just want to get through a couple little notes. And sorry, does anyone mind if we go like 4 minutes over or something? If people have to hop off? Okay. So it says, one of the earliest literary mentions of an animagus for Babbity was, was this book. This was one of the earliest mentions because Babbity the washerwoman is possessed by the rare magical ability, which I feel like is an interesting phrasing, but that's for another, just listen to the Transfigured, the Animagus episode with Emma and I, and then we can talk about this at the Discord. And then it says, Animagi do not retain the power of human speech while in their animal form. And so that was kind of where they were like, was this, like there's a discrepancy there between actual, that was like the most magical thing about this story, right? Was that was the only thing that was kind of like for a magical child reading this, the levitating a horse, the, doing different things, that's not quite so magical to them because it's kind of old news, but the talking animagus maybe was like the magical quote unquote thing for them. And this says, although they do keep all their human thinking and reasoning powers, right? So they can't talk, but they have that. And then it says, this, as every school child knows, is the fundamental difference between being an animagus and transfiguring oneself into an animal. In the case of the latter, so transfiguring oneself into an animal, one would become the animal entirely, with the consequence that one would know no magic, be unaware that one had ever been a wizard, and would need somebody else to transfigure one back. And I just thought that was like the most definitive like canonical description sort of that we have, I think, about what happens at least to an animate being turned into another one, but an animal, not a human turning into a non-human animal, and then turning back. Like that kind of gives us a lot more insight, I think, on sentience and transfiguration in general, that I want to kind of take that and think about other instances of transfiguration in the books and see if anything else comes to mind. But I thought that was interesting. And then bowtruckles are mentioned, cutting down such trees to steal them with risks of incurring not only the malice of the bowtruckles, which I thought was kind of funny because they seem so cute, but it says the malice of, but I know they can, team up. And then it says, for a full description of these curious little tree dwellers, see the book. And then it mentioned, I thought was nice, that McGonagall never used the ability to turn herself into a tabby for any surreptitious purpose, setting aside legitimate business on behalf of the Order of the Phoenix. So she did spy as a cat for the Order of the Phoenix, which we saw in like the very first, maybe second, third, I'm trying to picture it in the book that I have, maybe the third page. There was a curious cat when he was backing out. So yeah. And then in the chat, Brittany mentioned Barty Crouch Jr. turning Malfoy into a ferret. Yeah. So Draco wouldn't even, that's a really good, is that the only example we really have? Because people like transfigure parts into other sort of, right? But that's like the main example I think that we have of just turning a wizard into an animal and back. So I guess Draco didn't remember being a ferret, but then he was like terrified. So like, yeah, the only complete wizard transformation. Yeah. Oh yeah, and then Crumb's shark head also. That's a good point. I guess, is that kind of like what's the word? They do it a lot in like fics where they instead of, or like they talk about it in the Three Brothers concealment charms, like, but I guess no, because that's not just the aesthetic, like the look, like he was also like physically able to breathe underwater. So
yeah, it kind of doesn't make sense now with this new tidbit of information.
Yeah, maybe like Nicole said, partial versus full transfiguration into an animal. But like Crumb's brain would be in his head.
Brain is now shark brain, so
maybe it's just
forget that he's human.
Maybe it's just the outside, like
the respiratory system and the skin, but not.
Thematically, it might be his heart wasn't transformed, and his heart is where what remembered.
Interesting.
And,
yeah,
a lot of it's thematic, so just don't transform your chest, I guess.
Anyways,
we don't tangent here. Did anybody have any last? I know I talked like that entire Babbity Rabbity time, so people probably have really good things to say. And we can also the Three Brothers, there was the Grumbly Goat, and then like the story, but that wasn't even in the Three Brothers. And then he talks about Inferi, who are corpses animated by dark magic. And I think Inferi as ghastly puppets, not truly awakened humans. But I think that's all I had for the Tale of Three Brothers. So if anybody wants to comment on either that or stick with Babbity Rabbity just for last notes here. Parth said, side note, don't cut trees, save Earth. Yes, that too. We love animals. We love fauna and flora.
Yeah.
So
there wasn't really much in the Tale of the Three Brothers to really talk about in terms of like animals and stuff. But I feel like, for Babbity Rabbity, like to me, I don't even want to talk about the animagus part so much, like the turning into a rabbit, because we know that that's actually a witch and not an animal. But like with the dogs being forced to hunt down witches, and then with one of them dying from eating a poisonous toadstool, and then of course like the horse being levitated. Like I feel like those are my tragic heroes for that particular tale.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
For me, the transfiguration thing is the most interesting, because I feel like that does give us some answers. But for transfiguring an object into an animal, we still aren't sure of the sentience there, right?
Yeah, I don't think so. This is like the most information we've gotten on like a very specific form of transfiguration, because we don't know, like we know about like when like animagus transform, we know a little bit about that. We know a little bit about well, here also it's interesting because it says Animagi don't retain the power of human speech, check, but they keep their human thinking and reasoning powers. And it says all of their human thinking and reasoning powers, which would make me think that, well, no, that checks out. I think I was thinking of Lupin, but Lupin wasn't becoming an animagus. He was
it would be more the other marauders who are like,
yeah, that would be like them. And they knew,
now we can
and the
talk
reason
to you, but
yeah. Okay, that makes sense. All right.
The Draco example makes me feel really sad because I mean it's worse in the book than in the movie. In the movie he just kind of twirls them around and then obviously like other things, but in the book he like smashes them on the ground and like the ferret is like screaming and stuff. So like to think that the identity is an actual ferret and not Draco makes that a lot more upsetting. And then, but also like if you were to transfigure someone into an animal, they would just suddenly be, say, I don't know, a dog. If you transfigured them into a dog, but they're like an adult dog who has no memory of being a dog. Or do they have memory, like fake memory?
Yeah, that's a good point. Because animals,
they wouldn't know how to be a dog at that point. So
yeah.
And then if like if no one transfigured them back, then they're just this like lost, who am I? Like, what does it mean to be a dog? I don't have any idea. So
yeah. Oh, that's sad. I laughed before. Well, two things. One, there's that funny scene. I think it's an extended scene or a deleted scene. I don't think it's in all of the I think it's Sorcerer's Stone where Harry's, oh no, it's not Sorcerer's Stone, he's older. Well, wherever it is where Harry's like sitting on that cliff, like looking at Hogwarts, like across from it, and Hedwig's there, and he's like, who am I, Hedwig? But then there's like all these memes that are just like, I don't know, like I'm an owl, like I don't know what you're like supposed to be doing in your life. But anyway, but I laughed before because you were like, it makes me a lot more sad because we know that it's like that this is a ferret being hurt and not Draco. And I just thought, but like I just laughed at that because of just Draco sentiment. But because Draco wouldn't remember any of it because humans don't remember that when they're transfigured. But and then Parth made a really good point about in Fountain of Fair Fortune, they healed the malady of the witch by using only herbs. And that proves that you don't need animal ingredients in potion. So there.
Ooh,
also, I think I've done a little push for the podcast like 3 times now, but I'll do it again. The sponsorship that we have going for the Animagus episode next week, I forgot what day it is, has a little information about vegan potions too. So keep a lookout for that one. Yeah, go ahead, Catherine.
All the talk about like transfiguration and not remembering that you were human if you've been transfigured reminded me of something, and I just realized what it reminded me of. The quintupeds from Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, that they were actually supposedly the McBoone family, but they were transfigured into these monstrous 5-legged creatures by the McCliverts. And they resisted every attempt to turn them back into human form because they didn't remember that they were human, apparently. So that kind of gives that a little bit more like context as to maybe why they didn't want to be turned back into humans, like because they don't remember that they were human. Which it just also makes it interesting that like with that particular mythology that they're in Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them because they were originally human. Yeah.
It just made me think of like Kyle XY. Does anyone remember that show?
Oh yeah.
Where he's just like dropped in like this life, and like, I won't give spoilers, but he doesn't have like any memory of the past, and it's like amnesia, or was he just like born as like a 17-year-old or whatever? There's go ahead, Valerie.
One other thing that hasn't been mentioned yet, they mentioned invisibility cloaks in Tale of Three Brothers, and it said regular invisibility cloaks, which as we know are made out of Demigi's hair, could rip or grow opaque, and the charms placed upon them could wear off or be countered. So that makes me wonder, like, how many charms need to be even placed on those, and then like, does that why does it need to be an animal at that point if there are charms that they could just put on something?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I feel like we ask that question all the time as people who, you know, abstain as much as we can from animal exploitation. Like, why do this when you can so easily like do this instead, right? Which is kind of like a duh to us. But also, if it's like not as quality, you know, it's even more of like that doesn't quite make sense. But yeah. Oh, and the very last, I think the last creature mentioned are inferi, but it did say something about something attracting trouble as Grumble the Grubby Goat attracted flies. And I thought, nice, like insect representation, other than the worm, I guess. Well, I don't know I don't know how to, the familia and the genus. And let's see. Valerie's putting some quotes in the chat. So the first one is, the story had been rewritten to fit an anti-Muggle narrative, like the stories of animals are told untruthfully to fit the narratives of farmers, doctors, etc. I want that in my thesis. I want to like backtrack and like
back to school, rewrite it.
yeah, right. Well, not that I've been looking
at kidding.
PhD programs for the last like 3 days since I'm unsuccessful finding a job. So, but that's neither here nor there. But that's really interesting because every time I see like, because I want to go into children's books, and I always go like, whenever I go to a bookstore, I go straight to the kids section, and libraries like straight to the kids section. And like the number of books that have like, you know, cows give milk and chickens give eggs, and just like this sort of like this narrative that's given, you know, like, yes, chickens produce eggs naturally, but not the number that they're producing. And yes, cows produce milk naturally, but only when they're pregnant, and the pregnancy is not produced naturally. Like that's not natural.
Sorry, not laughing. I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing because I am envisioning you telling this to like a possible future child if you wanted one, and like they have this book and you're like, well actually like 2 years old, and like actually this is wrong.
No, that will 100% be me. I'll get all the vegan baby books, but then I'll also get the non-vegan ones like secondhand, and I'll be like, this is everything, like here's a red pen, go through, highlight the exploitation. They'll be like,
can't trust anyone or anything. You need to learn this now.
Yeah, I laughed because I thought you were picturing me like at a library, just like walking in, and like there's like kids reading these books, and I'm like, I like sit down at like the kids library table, and I'm like, let's just go through this book one by one. Like I could do that too. I'd be happy to. I do that with some of my friends who have kids, and they're like, we go to like Starbucks or something, and I get coconut milk, and they're like, why do you get coconut milk? I'm like, well, here we go. In an appropriate way to talk to a 4-year-old about that, which also catch last episode of Protego Cast, where we talked to Sarah Woodard, vegan author, about children's books and talking to kids about doing good things.
Now I'm just envisioning, you know how sometimes people will go and like put like inspirational quotes in books in like bookstores, but I'm envisioning like little sticky notes, and you just like open the book and put it there, and they won't know until they bought it. But I also, that's probably a really bad form of activism, because the parents would just be like, oh, vegans, what the heck are they doing? It would be fun.
I'm for it. Let's do it.
Yeah. I'm for it. Probably like, I'm thinking, sorry, and this is also just going off on this thought, but doing it in like smaller bookstores where like they're like more progressive or like leftist or like have really big, you know, like environmental or like queer studies like sections and stuff like that. Because I feel like I wouldn't want to get any of the employees in trouble at like Barnes and Noble where it's all like management and like strictness and whatever. But I'm down to put, that's what I interned for Mercy for Animals, and anytime any of the interns or any of the staff like go on vacation and stuff, they'll take like the little fresh booklets and like put them into like the seats in front of them, like kind of like inside like the emergency. Actually, I don't know if that's completely true that everybody does that in case this comes back and like gets people in trouble, but I know I did it. So like some people I worked with did. But anyway, we can bleep out the name of the org. So then the second quote that Valerie had was a particular type of Muggle thinking is that they're ignorantly prepared to accept all sorts of impossibilities about magic. And then it like reminds, this is you, Valerie, right? Reminds me of cognitive dissonance. So it reminds Valerie of cognitive dissonance and accepting false ideas about what happens to animals. So yeah, like prepared to be ignorant, basically. Like they're just like, you know, and ignorantly prepared, like, yep, this is fine. I'm going to accept this.
Like, yeah, obviously cows produce milk for me to drink, and like they're just different than all other mammals, and they just always produce milk. And it's like, if you really think about it, that's absurd. But yeah, we're just like, oh yeah, I believe that because someone told me that, you know. Definitely. We don't think about it any deeper.
Yeah, definitely. And then Parth adds here that Bloxham criticized, so one of the people who like wrote, you know, about the books and stuff, criticized it, saying that we need to protect young minds. And then so Parth says you need to educate them. Children know when to stop listening. They know what they can handle. And we talked about that a lot with our talk with Sarah 2 weeks ago. And yeah, kids know what to handle, and kids know a lot more than, it's like the whole thing right now in the media where, you know, not to get political, but there's one side saying that we can't have, you know, any romantic relationship or marriage or anything between like any couple who's not like heterosexual, and because it's like sexualizing children or something. But it's like, look at like any Disney movie and there's like a prince and a princess kissing. It's just the fact that these are like two men or two women or people who don't identify as man or woman, and that's like what you have an issue with. So anyway, but and the fact that it's saying that like kids are going to be like, kids don't care. It's adults who care. Like kids are like, oh, like, you know, they're just parents who love their kids, or they're just like happy people. Like it doesn't, you know, we learn these prejudices because they're passed down to us. Like we're not born thinking these things. And it's really similar to what we think, you know, we're not born thinking that, you know, animals should be used for X, Y, and Z. It's because we're fed animals and we're taken to zoos to look at animals, and we're taken, you know, and all of these, we use animals in language to represent negative things and, you know, insults and stuff. And it's all learned behavior. So yeah. And so we need to teach the children to, you know, this learned behavior that's better than what we're doing. So, yeah. And then Valerie says the best thing a person, child, or adult can do is to learn to question everything. Yeah. And to be open to changing your mind and being wrong, which was not easy for me. I don't know if my Slytherin hood or what, but taking constructive feedback was never easy for me. And I think I've gotten a lot better in the last like 2 years because I've worked with advisors and I've had a 117-page thesis read by multiple academics and commented on and everything. So yeah, but just to rewrite, you know, your truth basically. And that book that I think I've mentioned before, it's called The Scout Mindset, and just kind of like using like your thoughts and your ideas and everything. It's not like learning something new and something that you thought was right but is wrong is not like on you. It's just now you have more information to add to what you know to be true, basically. So it's not yeah, And including, Valerie says, questioning parents or guardians because they aren't always perfect or right. 100%. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if anybody here was born vegan because their parents or guardians were like, this is what you should do. You should not. But I think the majority of vegans don't have that. I have 2 friends who were born into vegan, or maybe just vegetarian, and then they went vegan, but like, that's great. But all of us had to kind of question our communities and question the people we trust in a lot of ways, because not every person, sorry, my roommate's cat's trying to get out. She's being so dramatic. But anyway, what was that?
I don't know. We heard a laugh.
Oh yeah, they're watching TV outside of my room. It was perfect timing. Sorry. I told them to be quiet, but it's fine. So I think that was all I was going to say. I could go on forever, but we're already 22 minutes over. Catherine says, so many lessons from these tales, even though there are few animals or magical creatures in them. Yeah. And then Parth earlier said something similar about how we talked about the book, which has the least amount of animal involvement, but we talked about it a lot. So yeah, I mean, look at us, like we can pull animal rights out of nothing, right? Or not nothing, but like we can pull it out of anywhere. Like read me a book with not one animate human or non-human animal, and I will talk about speciesism somehow, or yeah. But do you want to come say hi to everybody?
I'm always happy to point out when humans are being hypocritical or selfish, or like.
Hello.
She looks like a tiger.
Mm-hmm. No, don't step on my computer. That's Taki.
What a cutie.
She's cute on the outside, but she's mean on the inside. I love animals. But
look at that profile.
I know, it's a nice profile. Don't be shy. And Par said, imagine the discussion if the hopping pot was some kind of animal instead, of an inanimate object. Like if we had even more, like if one of these stories, because it is really weird that these stories aren't more animal based, like as fairy tales, but like we talked about earlier, humans have to use some other kind of device to kind of make things magical. And I think that animals are oftentimes used for that because they are so unlike us. And so, I mean, they aren't, but in the way of thinking, and in some ways they are, but so unlike, like, the norm that wizards have to use, they don't have to use animals for that purpose, I guess. But yeah, so I think that's it for this book club. If anybody had any last minute thoughts, but if not, then Valerie's going to be plopping some links in the chat. So as always, you can find more about us at protegofoundation.org. And I don't know, I think it's protegofoundation.org/book club, but if not, there's a link at the top, and you can register for book club every month. So our next one's going to be sometime in April. Date and time, we're still figuring that out. And I believe we're reading Quidditch Through the Ages, but if that changes, we will give you all an update. And April 30th, I just saw here, is the last Saturday of the month. So if we want to keep this time, it'll be April 30th at 5. If we change it again, we'll let you know, because it's hard, because you all know that there's people in different time zones and stuff, and we're trying to like cater to more people, but it's hard to all link up sometimes, and everyone's busy and everything. So then join our Discord server. I think you're all on the Discord, but anybody watching this, please feel free to join our Discord. You can find a link to that on our website also. And then Valerie also put a link in the chat of how to register for the next book club. And I think that's about it. So, and of course, for anyone watching this, feel free to make a donation. It's not required, obviously, for watching this video, but donations are very much appreciated. It's a small growing nonprofit. So tell us which book is your favorite which book your favorite is by donating that amount. And if you put a note in the donation that it's for book club, maybe we'll shout you out at the next one. So let's see. This discussion is going to be available on our YouTube channel and the website in a couple days, so look out for that. And then, yay. Okay, so thanks everyone. We'll see most of you before book club, and if not, we'll see you at book club on the Discord, in the Patreon, on Instagram, in the wild. Fanatical Fix always says to like their listeners, like if you want to write or ask a question, like email us or like send a postcard or like write your message in the snow and then like spin around 5 times and we'll get it, or like just like really funny things. That's all.
Thanks for
Bye.
Thank
Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Bye. Thanks everyone.